Good morning, everybody. So good to have you here on a Thursday morning for Community Connection. And I'd like to begin today with a statement. So bear with me, okay? It's hard to believe that we once educated black children in separate and grossly unequal school systems. But we did. It wasn't until the landmark Supreme Court case of Brown versus Board of Education in 1954 that the practice of segregation in schools was declared unconstitutional. While progress has been made in desegregating schools, many challenges and disparities still exist, and the legacy of segregation continues to linger in American society. It's also hard to believe that we used to allow children to work in difficult and dangerous jobs for over 40 hours a week. But we did. And it was only through the efforts of social reformers and labor unions and government legislation that child laws were eventually implemented to protect the rights and the well-being of children. Despite these efforts, however, child labor still persists in some parts of the world. And there's still much work to be done to ensure every child has a right to a childhood free of exploitation and abuse. It's hard to believe that there was once a time in our country when we put children in adult jails for things like stealing food, but we did. Over time, our understanding of child development and the needs of young people who are in trouble with the law has evolved. We now recognize that children are fundamentally different from adults and that they require different types of intervention and support. It's hard to believe that we once removed indigenous children from their families and forced them into boarding schools in order to educate them in the ways of white people. But we did. Now, acknowledging this painful history is important for reconciliation and healing, and for working towards a more just and equitable society for indigenous peoples. It's important that we learn about this history, listen to the experiences of those who suffered this, and work towards understanding and addressing the ongoing impacts of this traumatic legacy. It's hard to believe that there was a period when we cared for orphans and dependent children in large and often overcrowded institutions, but we did. Over time, it became clear that these institutions were not always able to provide the kinds of individualized care and attention children need in order to thrive. Children in orphanages often suffered from neglect and abuse and other forms of mistreatment. Many experience long-term negative effects as adults. It's hard to believe we once shipped kids on trains like cargo from inner cities in the east to unknown families out west to be cared for, but we did. While some did end up in loving homes, many children were used as cheap labor and suffered from abuse and neglect. The system was largely unregulated, and there was little oversight to ensure that they were placed in safe and caring homes. We recognize only now that this practice was flawed and failed to address the root causes of child poverty and neglect. Now, when we look at all of these images through the lens of today's understanding, we look at them with disbelief. Did we really treat children like this? It's almost laughable, but none of it's funny. Now, just imagine a society where the needs of children and their families are so generously met, and where the ideas of tearing children apart from their families as a way to care for them is equally unbelievable. Envision a day when future generations will view pictures like these and say, it's hard to believe we used to treat children like that, but we do. for now at least. And if nothing changes, nothing will change. I have a guest with me today. The Rob Meister has gone from behind the scenes out into the public, sitting here at the table in the seat that he was
strictly forbidden to sit
strictly
upon.
forbidden that this little man was going to sit in. But she's not here today. So we're having a good time, aren't we, Rob?
Yeah, she's on PTO. I couldn't reach her. I didn't really try either, so.
Glad to have you as a guest, Rob.
Thanks, Mr. Day.
So I want to talk about movements, right? All of these despicable acts of the past, we only see as despicable now, right? At the time, they kind of made sense in a worldview, in a situation, but it took people with a different mindset, a different paradigm, different values to say, hey, wait a minute, this is wrong. But it took a long time for some of these things to change. Some of them were, a generation or a century even to change.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. The one thing I think that happened is that we got closer to the problem over time, right? Where I think before maybe the problem was that we have too many orphans running around in our streets. We got to do something. We got to get them off our streets. And that was the problem. The problem wasn't that the child was being mistreated. The problem wasn't that the child was being neglected. The problem was there's too many running around, getting in the way of people going about their normal life.
The problem was the system. Our system is not adequate now to deal with this problem. We need another system.
Right.
Is often how it happened, right?
Right.
And even orphanages popped up because the poorhouses were inadequate to care for kids. So orphanages became a thing.
Right.
And then foster care as a movement said kids really don't belong in an institution. They belong with families. And so they started shipping these kids in trains to families out west that would take them.
Right. Yeah, and I think that's how movements begin, by clearly communicating what the problem is, and then clearly communicating how you fix that problem. And I think what you see here with this, and then obviously there's a plethora of other examples of this, is that over time people started to get closer and closer and closer to the problem, to that the point now is, wait, the problem isn't that we haven't too many orphans. The problem isn't that they're getting in the way of our everyday commerce. The problem isn't because they're in orphanages. No. What is the root of the problem? The root of the problem is that as a society, we're not caring for the most vulnerable, those in the margins, those that need the most help. And that's being clearly communicated. And so then the system then has to change to deal with that problem instead of dealing with all these other problems.
So what I was really interested in having you a part of this conversation today is because all of these movements to bring change had to use the technology of their day, right? And so sometimes that was mass-producing pamphlets and trying to hand them out, or writing a book, or traveling to many places as you can and give a speech and hope people would come to hear you, right? And then new technologies came, radio and television. We were talking before the show how the civil rights movement, right, and how television came on the scene right at that time.
Right.
And it was those images of Bull Connor releasing the police dogs on those kids down in Alabama. Right. What that did to say, everybody said, they may not have been interested before in the thing, but they looked at that and they said, no, that's not who we want to be as Americans.
Right. And I think the interesting thing about as media shifted to kind of be better useful to the general population, right? So you had newspapers. Well, newspapers require that somebody be able to read, right? And so there's only a certain part of the population that's actually taking action based on what they're reading in a newspaper. And then you go to radio. Well, most people can understand what's being spoken to them, but it's still English primary language. But then with television, now you cross everything. Because even if you don't understand what language that somebody is speaking on a television, you can take away a lot of the visual, and you can take away a lot of tone and attitude and see, no, that's not right. And it was interesting too with television and the civil rights movement. It was not just rallying for a cause, but rallying against action and seeing, you know what, this government, this command and control that you talk about frequently, that's not okay. Something needs to change. And they could see it. And being able to see it helped to kind of rally that base, and people could rally around. And then having a great leader like Martin Luther King who could step in there and actually help push towards a
He
common.
could articulate it
Right.
so well.
Right. So that it wasn't just that somebody was like fomented and angry,
Yeah.
but it was, okay, take that anger. That's okay. You should be angry that these things are happening, but then use it in a useful way that results in we're going to protest in a way that is going to result in change.
Because there were many allies in the civil rights movement, right? They were the very kind of what we think of radical, right? Like the Black Panthers, maybe even resulting to violence to bring change. And then there were the pacifists on the other side saying we're going to do this peacefully. And King was kind of a disciple of Gandhi in that he was going to use a nonviolent approach to this. But it took all those voices. Right. And at the same time, the Vietnam War was going on.
Right.
And so you really had two movements happening at the same time, but they were leaning sometimes on each other and using these new technologies. And the street protests were huge, a part of that, in a way that had not really happened before in America.
Well, and it's interesting too, like in the photojournalism world, Vietnam War was one of the first wars where the U.S. military had to fight a war that it wasn't ready for. And that war was the media, where they were having to accommodate the fact that you have all of these cameras everywhere documenting everything, and they couldn't win it. And no matter what, I mean, were there atrocities and were there things that happened? Absolutely, 100%. But it was a battle they weren't prepared to fight. And I think looking over on the civil rights side of things, you look at Malcolm X, the Black Panthers, Martin Luther, and should they have been that angry? Was violence something that they felt like, man, this is how I'm going to communicate? I mean, I don't fault them, right? If I was treated that way, so it's the sheer like volume of self-control that Dr. King had is something that I've always been amazed at. And I don't know how I would have been.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So let's go even back further. Child labor laws. Kids worked sometimes as young as 6 years old. They could work 40 hours a week. They didn't go to school. There wasn't free school at that time. And so a number of movements were happening at the same time. There were kids shouldn't be working. Kids should be school, but there's no free school unless you had parents who could afford that. So you had several movements happening kind of at the same time. Foster care started popping up in the scene and saying kids don't belong in these institutions, let's get them out. How do we take the gains or the lessons from 150 years ago and try to apply them to foster care? Because in my mind, we're at a place now where the intervention that we put in place, the care for vulnerable and abandoned children, is now as harmful or can be as harmful. And we know from the data the outcomes for kids who go into foster care is bleak. And just the intervention of removing a child from a family is traumatic. It's kind of a pain that will last the rest of their life.
Right.
I read something yesterday. It changed my paradigm. We always talk about TBR, terminations of parental rights. Right? It's like the death sentence for a family. They've lost the ability, the right to have their children. But this article I read yesterday turned it around and says you're terminating the right of the child to have access to their parent. That's the more damning part of this. And when you think of it that way, you are sentencing the child to even worse than what the parents experience. As horrible as that would be for a parent, the child saying, I can never see my parent again. Right? So how do we take the same kind of angst and anger and hurt and grief that was part of other movements and said, this is wrong. We can do better. We've got to do better. I feel like we're in the very early stages of this.
Well, and I think that paradigm shift that you're talking about holds the key, and that is until we're willing to look at this from the perspective of the child
There you go.
and not look at it from the perspective of us as adults, because it's very easy for us with our brains that are fully developed. You know, we're over 25 years old, right? We're not having to worry about some of these early childhood phenomenons as far as like psychological development. Looking at this from that perspective, but also looking at it from the perspective of, hey, I managed to make it through. I managed to get through it. Well, what if getting through it wasn't the best solution?
Well, these last pictures of these kids showing the signs. I've been in foster care this many days, and the kid's smiling. It looks like a victory. We've won something. But it doesn't show all the pain and the agony and the grief that's gone before that. Or there's no way to also capture what that child will deal with the rest of his or her life, right? Which we now know is true because of ACEs and what we know about trauma. So it's not a celebration.
Right.
And I think future generations will look at that and go, I can't believe we used to celebrate that.
Yeah, you wonder. You wonder if it's going to be very similar to how we just looked at the pictures of the kids double stacked in beds,
Yeah.
right, in that orphanage, right, where it's like, wow, you guys thought that was a good thing, and you know, what if these resources that we're putting towards separating families, we instead put to keeping families together,
Absolutely.
and for the good of the child, right? And I'm not saying that, you know, there's a situation where there's physical harm and those kind of things, that we support that. But as you've pointed out many, many times, those instances are a very small percentage in comparison with the instances where, hey, if we redirected all of
Yes.
these funds, because it's an industrial complex at this point. There's
Absolutely. So much.
There's hundreds of millions of dollars being spent on this. And we celebrate the fact that a child was in foster care for 962 days or whatever it was.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Feels like it's a good time for a break.
Yeah.
I usually introduce the commercial at this time.
Right.
Why don't you do that for us today,
Okay.
Rob?
So it's camp season, and we're getting ready to have all these kids down at Hat Creek Camp, but we still need a few more counselors. And I've enjoyed, especially the last couple summers, getting to know each of these counselors, and this past summer especially, starting to get to know them a little bit better and kind of hearing more of their story and their heart. And watching it change them from the beginning of the summer to the end of the summer. I mean, some of these counselors, the person that I met in June was very different from the person that I talked to in July or after. And the reason is because kids. And that paradigm shift is happening subconsciously, where they're looking at it from the perspective of the child. And so if you or someone you know is looking for something to do this summer, we could still use a few more counselors down there. And it will change your life.
Absolutely.
And I've seen it firsthand. So give this a watch.
I've actually known about Hat Creek Camp since I was about 12. And so then when I was like getting into like wanting to work with foster kids and going to like social services and stuff like that, I was like, that would be a great opportunity.
This is my third summer at camp. I'm the counselor coordinator this year. My role looks a little bit different than I expected. I'm here for the counselors, so that they can best serve the kids. Whatever the counselors need, however they need support, whenever they need direction or planning and that kind of structure.
So at camp, you have the highest of highs and the lowest of lows, and there's like almost no in between. You are forced to grow, and it really just matters where you grow or like how you grow, but you will grow as a person. Laying my vulnerabilities down at the foot of the cross has been a huge lesson I've learned. And again, the kids help you learn that, because the kids come up and they have no filter and they'll immediately just pull at anything that you could be vulnerable about yourself.
These kids have enough going on at home, a lot of them. And I want them to just be a kid. I want them to just be able to exist and be. And get better and heal. If I can play a small part in that by giving them a cup of water or making them smile or just showing them like you matter, you're not just a number, you're not just a person in a place. That's what I love about camp is you get to do that every day.
So honestly, I've learned to just have fun, to dance at a dance party, to sing louder than I've ever sang in my life, to just smile and have fun, because that's what the kids need. It's summer camp. They don't need, you to sing on the right key or to say the word full right. They need to just love them and just to have fun.
The people that are either here year round or the people that are seasonal and they come in just for the summer, you know that God's here. He's present, he's working. It feels like a home. We're a smaller camp. We don't have as many kids or as many cabins or the biggest property, but we've got the Lord and we really love these kids. And that's what we build everything else on.
Oh, well, here we are back again.
That's a beautiful story. It's well told, but it's also well captured.
Yes.
And that's credit to you and your team, Rob.
Oh, thanks. They're a good team. They're a good team. It was a lot of fun, I think, the last couple summers. So,
camp was a movement at one time, and so we're benefiting from something that happened a long time ago, where people said, let's go out and camp. Right. And it was a religious kind of thing, the old camp meetings, and then so it's ended up to being where it is today. It's a beautiful thing, and it's for kids, at least for us. And I love what she said. We're not the biggest camp. We don't have the most cabins. We don't have the most land. Well, we got the Lord. That's powerful. That's great. So let's kind of wrap this up a little bit. In that, I'd like to hear your advice on what do we need to do, or how can we tap in to resources or technology that's there to start raising awareness of the need, both the need of what is bringing kids into foster care, but the need to change what foster care looks like so that we're doing a better job of taking care of these kids and their families.
So the number one thing that I've been thinking a lot about and praying a lot about the last year especially has been listening. We have got to find a way to listen to the people that are being affected by whether it's foster care, whether it's adoption, whether it's fathers or mothers or social workers, anybody who is in that river, like we like to talk about. They're in it. They're struggling to find a way to get out of it. If we don't find a way to start listening better, instead of doing what we've kind of started to see a lot more of, which is us talking at them. Well, you can't talk to somebody until you have a frame of reference for where to start from, and you got to do that by listening. So we have to find a way to start listening to that mom who's got 3 kids, who doesn't know what to do next, knows that she has these resources available to her if she does this, 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 and this. But man, she's just one flat tire away from falling apart. And then those kids go, God knows where, right? So I think first we listen. I think every great movement that has sustained itself over time listened well at the beginning, listened well at the middle, listened well at the end. And so that's, I think that's the first thing. And I think the second thing is we've got to be willing to go to where those people are and affiliate ourselves with people that are already there and prop them up, as opposed to, okay, we're here, now we're going to make it all better now. And it's like, but you brought the TV cameras with you. You're just doing this so that somebody will see the name on the back of the T-shirt or whatever and say, oh, that's why you're really doing it. So I think those are the 2 keys for me.
Can technology help that, or is technology getting in the way?
So I think it was Einstein that said that eventually technology will get us to a place where we will become the tools of our tools. And we are right on that precipice right now. It's funny to watch, a lot of the stuff with AI, right? Right now, where there's some great content that can be generated from it, but it's not meaningful. It's not personal. It's not this. It's not you and I talking in a room right here. One of the sexy terms on social media is deep fake, right? Like, we can't trust that that's actually true. But we're getting to a place now where we really are going to have to look at each other and say, what is the most important thing? And you know what? One of the most important things is maybe we need to start putting these down. And I'm guilty of this, right? It's very easy for me to pick this up and read about, this is happening, see this thing that's happening, see that thing that's happening. But I got kids over here, I've got a wife over there, I got a fourth one coming on the way. Yes, I think technology can be helpful, but we need to view it as a tool, not become the tool of it.
Yeah, well said, well said. In the book Tipping Point, the author talks about, everything reaches a tipping point where it's no longer useful, right? And I think we were at a point where social media, certain technologies is no longer useful, but actually harmful, and then a movement will often come from. So orphanages reached a point where they're no longer, right? They were causing more harm than they were helping. I think we're at a point where foster care, we're saying this isn't helping. We can't keep letting it grow like it is and expect we're going to get any different. So we're at this tipping point, and we got to have those conversations that you said. But I do think, I hope and pray that we will move back, take a step back from it as a society and start doing those things that are more important, family and time to just enjoy nature and have space and right?
I think in organizations like ours, investing in having community conversations and championing those and fostering those and going out and connecting with other organizations that are better positioned to have those conversations in certain spaces, I think that should become the new. That's the in the old days. You had the drugstores, right? And that's where people went and they had their conversations and whatnot. And then, in a previous life, I was part of a photo print shop, right? And well, in a lot of ways, the photo print shops became that for a time, in the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, where, that's where people would go. They'd get their prints done. They'd catch up with so-and-so. And the person who's running their prints knows everybody in the community because they've seen everybody's pictures, right? And you know everything about everybody. But I think having those important conversations where we're bringing in people in neighborhoods to a central place and having conversations together and hearing those, if we don't start solving it at the small grassroots local level, it's going to keep being preached down to us from above.
I'm kind of convinced that there's almost a counter movement needs to happen with foster care. We don't need more intervention. We don't need more money. We don't need more government. We need more community. We need more neighbors.
Yes.
We need more friends. We need more conversation. We need more space, right? The stuff that culture's throwing at us now, driving our kids crazy and causing them anxiety and depression and all kinds of mental health issues. And we got to back off or we'll never get where we need to go.
The churches that are finally willing to step into that role and that church that's brave enough to say, hey, I want to be that for my community, those are the churches that are going to be the churches still here in the future.
Cool. And the time remaining, you reminded us that we're at our, three-year anniversary of this little thing we're doing
That's
right
correct.
here.
April 16th, 2020.
We had our first town hall meeting, as they were called back then.
Yep.
Share a little memory of that in the office, trying to pull all that together.
Well,
because COVID forced us into it.
Right. It was COVID was forcing us to do a lot of things, and we needed a way to communicate quickly as things were changing to our staff, and that's what this started as just a way for you to say, hey, keep your chins up. We're not really sure what's coming. At that point in time, we had moved past this is going to be done in 2 weeks to maybe this is going to be 4 to 6 weeks, right? Little did we know. But you identified. It was really your vision that said, hey, we got to be able to get in front of these people because everybody started going virtual, right? And COVID taught us that a lot of people really could just be working from their home. And so that's what this was. This was an opportunity for you to connect, make sure people were staying safe, drinking lots of water,
We're gonna get through
keep
this.
your 6 feet, wear your mask,
Yep.
right? And we're going to get through it. And then over time, over the next month or two, we realized this thing's not really going away. So why don't we see what else we can do with it? And so we brought in a few guests via, off-site. They were virtual. And that's when we started realizing that we didn't really have the computing power and the technology and everything that we needed here. And so we started investing in some of that technology. And now it is what it is. We've had, several dozens of guests now.
Some pretty powerful
Some
stuff
great-
have come from our
Great
guests.
conversations. Great conversations.
Which goes back to your point. We've got to have conversations with
listen.
more people who have different perspectives than we do, people who are living in the space, working in the space, doing things that we've never thought of before.
100%.
Rob, I thank you for bringing leadership to this thing we call Community Connection. And we're all sad that you're going to be stepping away from Patrick Henry Family Services and into other spaces, doing other things. I appreciate that you're leaving well. I appreciate that you're going to probably stay connected with us. I hope so. We're going to come and haunt you if you don't. We need the Rob Meister from time to time to pop in and see how you're doing. Any parting words of wisdom, any blessings, anything? Hopefully we'll get to have a party before you go, but this may be the last time we see you on air.
I have loved every second of my 4 years and 3.5 months that I've been here. And I guess for me, I'm not going far. I'll still be around here locally, and I will still be connected because I don't think you can just close the door on something like this and then that's final. So I'll be close, and thanks for having me all this
Just be
time.
partners in a different way going forward.
You better believe it.
All right. Thank you, Rob Wheeler. We love you very much.
Thank you, sir.
All right. Thanks for joining us today for Community Connection, and we'll see you next Thursday.
Nobody gets to choose their family. If a person is fortunate enough to be born into a healthy family, then life can be much like floating down a smooth, gentle river in the summertime. But an unhealthy family is like a dangerous river, filled with rocks, debris, and fast-moving water. This river swiftly leads to the steep waterfall of adulthood, tragically forming a new river of dysfunction. Even if you aren't born into an unhealthy river, there are many streams that cause a person to get there. But there is only one way to get out, and that is through a meaningful relationship. Across our region, there are many agencies, churches, and families who are devoted to helping children escape from unhealthy rivers. Some feel their role is to wade in and rescue children. They foster, adopt, or provide safe families. Others stand by the river and support the rescuers by providing what they need. Still, others are upstream and stand in the gap to keep children from ending up in the negative situations. At Patrick Henry Family Services, we see ourselves as having an additional role. We are running up and down the shores of the unhealthy river, screaming, "Can't you see the children in the water? You have to do something." Vision 30 is a 10-year initiative. By 2030, we envision a region where all children are safe in their own family, or with caregivers who are supported by a local faith community. So, where do you stand at the river? Are you upstream, keeping families together and strong by standing in the gap? Are you in the river, directly impacting children? Are you on the shore, providing support for the brave folks who have entered the river? Or are you just passing by without noticing? No matter who you are, come down to the river with us. Let us help you find your place. Not only will lives be changed, but you will never be the same.